President Trump claimed in a press conference Tuesday afternoon the U.S. has given hundreds of billions of dollars more in aid to Ukraine than Europe, and that it needs to take on more responsibility for the country. This came hours after U.S. government representatives met with Russian officials to talk about the future of Ukraine and a possible resolution to the nearly three-year war between Ukraine and Russia. European leaders voiced their frustrations about being left out of the process, considering they have supported Ukraine's war effort over the last 3 years, with more than 130 billion euros in aid. But Europe as a whole outspent the U.S. in almost every aid category except military spending. Trump has called for all European countries to contribute at least 5% of their GDP to defense spending overall, a metric that not even the U.S. currently meets. European nations have increased their defense spending in response to the Ukraine-Russia war, but most are spending around 2% of their GDP. According to the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, which has tracked Ukrainian aid for the past 3 years, Europe has allocated 132.3 billion euros to Ukraine. That includes both individual countries and the EU as a collective, and is more than the U.S.'s equivalent of 114.2 billion euros. So when you filter by aid type, Europe gives about 2 billion euros less in military aid, such as weapons, than the U.S. But it significantly outspends the U.S. when it comes to humanitarian and financial aid. There are 6.8 million Ukrainian refugees who have settled into new countries, often within Europe. Germany has spent about 35 billion euros providing shelter and government services to refugees. Poland has spent around 30 billion euros. In comparison, a U.S. Government Accountability Office report from last May found the U.S. has spent about $3.1 billion, which equals about 3 billion euros on resettling Ukrainian refugees. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has also called for Europeans to be prepared to send their own troops to help Ukraine rebuild after the war, because the U.S. will not. The UK's Prime Minister said in response to Hegseth's comments that his military would be ready to put boots on the ground. Gina Smialek joins us now. She's the New York Times Brussels bureau chief. Gina, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio denied anyone was being sidelined in these talks with Russia. How do the European leaders feel?
Well, the European leaders have been meeting for their own talks, so I think we can deduce from that they feel fairly sidelined. And I think there's really sort of this moment of discussion happening here in Brussels and in Paris, where these meetings have been happening, where people are sort of talking about, how does Europe stay relevant in a world where the U.S. is to some degree negotiating unilaterally or bilaterally with Russia. And so I think that there is a sort of real soul searching going on around this.
And at the Munich Security Conference on Saturday, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte had this message for European leaders. Let's watch.
To my European friends, I would say, get into the debate, not by complaining that you might yes or not be at the table, but by coming up with concrete proposals, ideas, ramp up the spending, make sure that the training and the weapon supplies continue, but also come up with concrete ideas what, for example, security guarantees could look like.
Interesting, the ramp up the spending part. I mean, some of this sounds like what President Trump has been saying. What has the reaction been to that?
Yeah, so the ramp up the spending thing has been something we've been hearing about basically for months now, coming from Mark Rutte, also coming from a lot of EU leaders. It's really been a clear priority here in Europe to try and ramp up how much they're dedicating to NATO and to their own defense. I think Munich, though, was this line in the sand that has really emphasized for people that they need to do that faster than they previously had expected, that things are more urgent and more necessary than I think anybody had previously
understood. But Gina, Europe is outspending the U.S. when it comes to aid, maybe not military aid, but humanitarian, economic, refugee aid?
Yes, and they will often point this out, but I think that there is this idea that Europe is probably not capable at this point of going it alone when it comes to defense. They just do not have some of the key sort of necessities that would be important to defending their own borders. And so they are quite reliant on America as a partner. And I think there's this idea that increasingly they need to be able to grapple with a world where America may be a less willing partner. And so you've heard that everywhere in Brussels today. There were a lot of finance ministers in town. There were a lot of foreign ministers around for various meetings. And as they were doing doorsteps and as they were talking to the press, I think a consistent message that we heard today was we really need to get this spending together. And I think Munich put a line under just how quickly they need to do that.
And the British Prime Minister said he is willing to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine as part of a deal to end the war. President Trump today said he would welcome Europe doing that. Is that something that could potentially take shape, and is that a shared view throughout Europe?
That is clearly something on the table and being discussed at the moment. I think that it is more under debate than just a cut and dry solution. I think we've already seen Donald Tusk out of Poland suggesting that that might be difficult for Poland to do, that Poland will continue supporting Ukraine, but putting actual boots on the ground might be challenging. I think you're hearing some of the smaller countries express a few misgivings on the sidelines just because they don't have enough people to send necessarily. So I think this is clearly going to be an issue of further discussion. And I imagine that we'll hear more about it in the weeks to come.
Well, Gina Smiley, that means we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.